Okay, well, thank you all for coming for what is going to be a really exciting session of the Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research Speaker Series. I'm particularly delighted to be here, speaking on behalf of the Maurer School of Law, who is the official representative for this talk. We assign talks between us, and have the privilege of inviting my dear friend and former classmate, Mailyn Fidler. Mailyn is an assistant professor at the University of New Hampshire Franklin Pierce School of Law. She is also affiliated with the Berkman Klein Center, the Information Society Project, and has done basically anything you can imagine in these areas of international law, cybersecurity, technology, with a focus on crime, with a focus on national security. In a personal capacity, I will tell you that I went to Mailyn's wedding. The person here is not only a wonderful human being, she's also a dear friend. And I have cited her work many a times, and I've turned to her many a times when I think about my own issues. And I have no doubt that you are in for a treat with this discussion titled Cybersecurity Mission.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for having me here today. As some of you may have heard, I actually grew up here. And so this is a bucket list item for me to come back here and give a talk at IU. I also gave my first presentation in this field ever when I was a summer intern with CACR. I won't say how many years ago now. It's wonderful to be back. So thank you. So I'm here today to present on cybersecurity mission creep. This, to us who all work in cybersecurity, this might sound like a good thing, right? It will keep us employed if cybersecurity is expanding as a field. I have set myself the very difficult task of convincing all of us who work in this that this is actually not a good thing. So that's what I'm setting out to do today. Just a quick note, I know some of you might have looked up the paper online. This talk actually represents a revised version of that paper. The new version will go up in about 4 days, if all goes according to plan. So just know that there will be a difference in what I say here and what's in the paper. So how did this idea get started? I actually was setting out to teach cybersecurity law for the first time. And for those of you who teach, you know, one of the things you have to do when you start a new class is figure out what's in and what's out. And so I was setting myself this task of figuring out what counts as a cybersecurity issue. And I started noticing that more and more issues were being framed as part of the cybersecurity conversation. And I was sort of confused and a little curious about this. Here's an example of one. Right, cybersecurity saved US democracy. This is a reference to the misinformation task force at CISA. And so I was sort of confused, like, this seems like a big claim. Is this something I should be covering in my cybersecurity law class? And I was actually looking for a paper that talked about this sort of conceptual expansion, and I couldn't find anything, so decided to write it. A little bit too late to include in that class, but it also struck me that there's something deeper and more theoretically interesting going on here than just this question of figuring out what is in and out of bounds for cybersecurity. So what is cybersecurity mission creep? The paper attempts to define this. I put forward this term, this framework called cybersecuritization. So this might sound a little bit familiar to you if you know national securitization. This works in quite a similar way. I want to explain it. So what is cybersecuritization? What I am positing is that it is when something policy issue is framed as a tech threat. Now, what is a tech threat? What does that mean? I'm arguing that it means three things. So number one, first of all, and this seems sort of intuitive and simple, but the policy issue is framed as something that poses security risks. So again, we can think about misinformation, right? Instead of framing it as a question about platform governance, right? It is framed as a threat to US democracy, et cetera. Now, again, I'm not saying that that is a wrong framing. I'm just pointing out that it is framed as a threat. Second, it is framed as particularly threatening in virtue of its technical features. So it's not just a threat, but the fact that it involves technology is something that makes it very threatening. So again, with the misinformation case, we saw this. There was language pointing out the scale and the speed of the spread of misinformation along technical dimensions that made it so particularly threatening as an issue. And then last, it's framed as a threat to a non-technical societal target. So this is important, I think, especially for the technical folks in the room. I'm not talking about sort of things that come on the horizon that are sort of new, properly scoped cybersecurity issues, okay, AI is now a cybersecurity issue, but the conversations around that are saying AI is a threat to the technical system, the technical integrity of our systems. This is saying this is a threat to something outside just the sort of parameters of the technical system, something societal. I want to give you a few examples of the misinformation case. A couple of other ones. TikTok is a digital weapon. So you all are aware of the sort of TikTok ban, TikTok purchase agreement. Again, we saw the same tech threat framing with TikTok. So it was framed as a threat to our national security, right? So that's to a societal target. It's framed as a threat. It was framed as particularly threatening because of its algorithmic nature. There's a lot of language about it being a digital weapon, that kind of thing. Something else that is interesting to me, especially as a criminal law scholar, is we're starting to see claims like this happen in the criminal law space too. So not just with tools that are used every day, but we're seeing this in the criminal law space where there's a lot of language about things like AI being as dangerous as a gun in the criminal context. And so again, there, technology is being framed as a threat, right, to general public safety. So you can see how that tech threat framing works. Now, once you sort of have this in your mind, this tech threat framing, you start seeing it everywhere. I presented this at another conference, and then every speaker that went after me was like, cybersecuritization is happening in my thing too. So this is sort of a basic, helpful vocabulary term, but why is it helpful on that? Why does this matter? Yeah, why does this matter? Good question. Okay, so I want to make the first claim. First claim is that cybersecuritization simplifies the deliberative process. Now, this doesn't always result in poor or bad policy outcomes. So I'm not saying that this is an inherently bad thing, but there is one inherently bad thing about it, which is its effects on the deliberative process. And then I'm going to point out that it also sort of tends to guide policy responses towards some negative things, but they don't always happen. So again, simplification of the deliberative process. So what happens? How does framing something as a tech threat simplify the deliberative process? Number one, it makes security considerations more relevant, more salient. It brings them to the surface. And again, sometimes this can be important and useful, right? It might be good to start thinking about misinformation and its security dimensions when we haven't necessarily thought about that before. It also makes technical considerations salient, right? This is being framed as a technical issue that comes along with things that people think about tech, right? This is complicated. It's maybe inaccessible to the general public. So again, it's making these considerations more salient, while at the same time downgrading the importance of other considerations. So if something is a security issue and it's a technical security issue, if you try to frame it in a different way, you end up looking like you're against security, which is sort of not tenable position to be in. It makes these considerations come up front and lets others recede to the background. It also brings urgency to the conversation. So if you just talk about misinformation as a platform governance issue, that's important. But now you're framing it as a tech threat. That's something we need to respond to quickly and potentially with sort of escalated policy responses. So it brings urgency to the conversation as well. This last one, there's another way that it simplifies the policy conversation, and that's actually how you respond. So it simplifies opponents' responses as well as those who are trying to frame the debate. Because this has been simplified as a security technical issue that is urgent and emergent, doesn't leave opponents with a lot of room to sort of push back against those framings or try to raise or re-raise the considerations that have been downgraded. And so what I'm arguing is that this tech threat framing of the conversation also forces any responses to that initial response to use argumentative trump cards themselves. What do I mean by that? The First Amendment is a really good example here. So all of the case studies I walk through in the paper have typically been challenged on First Amendment grounds. I think a lot of these issues have real First Amendment issues with them, but First Amendment operates as an argumentative trump card in our society, much like sort of threat language. And so to counter that, there's more incentives to respond using things like the First Amendment rather than hooking your response to some of those considerations that have been pushed to the side. Again, not saying there aren't First Amendment issues, but it changes the contours of the response and incentives that we see there. Okay. So simplification of the deliberative process. Again, I want to say this is sort of always a flaw, regardless of whether the outcome we like is good or bad, because of how we get there, that it is obscuring particular considerations. But I also want to argue that there are second order consequences to cybersecuritization. So this simplification often, but does not always, also result in these sort of negative outcomes of the policy process. Again, this first one, it's sort of on the line between negative and positive, and I want to explain why. So that simplification of the debate, right, framing it as a security and a tech issue, not only frames the terms of the debate, but also frames who should respond to the issue. So in particular, those with special knowledge encountering security threats or encountering technical threats sort of become the apt responders to the issue. Again, this can be a good thing, right? Sometimes we need that expertise, but it also deepens the simplification effects that happened in the deliberative process section, right? Now the people in the room are not necessarily going to be those who are raising the sort of dampened down considerations. They're going to sort of be redoubling this as a tech threat. What's particularly problematic is that in a lot of the case studies I looked at, we start to see not only elevation of expertise, but abuse of expertise. And what do I mean by that? So basically, political actors are responding to the positioning of this issue as a tech threat, right, which needs experts to respond to it. But they start to position the expedient actors as sort of the apt experts to respond to this, instead of those who sort of have actually relevant knowledge. So to give an example, one of the case studies I walk through is the cybersecuritization of child social media use. So we see child social media use being framed in this tech threat language, right? It is a threat to them, to their mental health, etc. It is a threat because of its technical dimensions. Okay, we need to handle this, right, in a new, heightened fashion. We need experts in the room. The move that we see there, particularly in states that have sort of been at the leading edge of this, is to say parents are the right expert to handle this. Now, certainly they are experts in some things, but are they really tech threat experts? There's a little bit of a mismatch between the framing and the experts that are chosen. And so this framing is sort of being used to usher in sort of a politically expedient expert rather than sticking within the bounds of the expertise there. So sometimes we start to see expert expert drift or creep, right? And who is relevant to solving these policy issues. I also want to talk about opaque governance. So all of these things combined start to tend towards more opaque governance solutions. So what does that mean? Basically, all of this together, right, especially if you have multiple markers of this, will result in more opaque governance. So both simplification of the issue and specialization of the issue are going to bring aspects of opacity or less accessibility to the solutions. So security, again, if you're starting to contest that, you might be labeled as for insecurity, right? That is hard to counter without fighting that battle. Again, tech is also going to be sort of positioned as less contestable, right? You don't understand it. You're not an expert. Leave it to the pros. So both the terms of the debate and those who respond is sort of removed from the realm of public contestation. What happens then is it tends to increase the secrecy around those governance decisions, given both the simplification and the expertise. So again, in the misinformation case, we saw CISA handling this largely behind closed doors, not in the public realm. Ultimately, we know a lot about what happened, but that was as the result of contestation, lawsuits, et cetera. So this wasn't sort of a public-facing response to begin with. It was a tech threat, but the experts handle it. A more complicated case of this sort of increase in opacity of governance is the criminal realm. So I mentioned the AI, the crime by AI laws. how does this work here? How does this work here? So we have the simplification, right? It is a problem. It's a threat to public safety. We should handle it using the experts of the criminal legal system. Again, you see a little bit of a mismatch. Maybe that those are not the most apt experts to handle a tech threat, but that's how the experts are positioned here. But then, right, you have the laws that are being passed through public legislatures, public trials. That seems like it's not particularly opaque governance in that nature. So certainly, right, it doesn't always end up with opaque governance, but you could also position things like prosecutorial discretion, right? This moves it into the realm of prosecutorial discretion. They can decide whether they're going to bring a charge on this basis. That happens behind closed doors. So as a result of positioning this as an expert matter, right, for prosecutors, you do get some elements of opaque governance, but also some aspects that are not so opaque. Okay, so that's the sort of big critique. I want to spend a few more minutes talking about a couple of other things. So I mentioned at the beginning, this works a lot like national securitization. Why is this different? Why is it important that we separate this out? I argue that cyber securitization is actually an easier route to national securitization. So it sort of opens another door to national securitization because it has not one, but two powerful sort of normative narrative invocations, right? It's not just a security issue, it's a tech issue. There's sort of a double black box that this issue is put in. And so it makes it easier to position issues as national security issues than just invoking one of those bases. And so again, we saw that in the TikTok case. We see that in cases of hardware bans, so the Huawei ban, things like that. You start to see this almost everywhere once you go down into the national securitization pathway. You also see it, and this has been pointed out to me as sort of a positive upshot of the interaction between cyber securitization and national securitization, which is especially like think about the TikTok case. That's a private company. Cyber securitization helps the government frame private actor decision as a national security issue. So if they just tried to claim TikTok's a national security issue, there would be a lot of pushback saying, hey, this is in the private sector, right? This is the private sphere. But adding that cyber securitization element in makes that argument a little bit less strong because the problem is the tech, not just the national security implications. And increasingly things are moving in that direction. So this is a helpful tool, again, for highlighting risks that really do matter. Another thing I want to point out is the interaction between cyber securitization and criminalization. So this works in much the same way as national securitization. Cyber securitization offers a really easy path to criminalization or over criminalization if you are a part of that conversation. It provides, again, two really easy bases to say we should criminalize this behavior. It's a threat to public safety, and it's scary because these folks are hackers. They're technically sophisticated if they're using these tools in their criminal activity. So basically, cyber securitization supercharges routes to making moves like this. Okay. This is where we're going to bring audience participation in. I have some other examples I want to talk through, but you all are, I'm going to ask you which one you want to talk through first. We might get through all of them, but I want to hear from you. Which one do you all want to talk through first?
Journalists.
Journalists. Okay, first one on the list. That's also my favorite. There we go. Okay, so a lot of you have probably heard all of the conversations around the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Absolutely an instance of cyber securitization leading into criminalization. I want to talk about a particular flavor of CFAA and cyber securitization that has been going on for a long time, but has sort of increased in recent years. The example I cover in my paper, there's two. The first one is sort of, I think, the most egregious. So we had a reporter in Missouri who was covering education, right? Doesn't seem like this is going to go in the cyber securitization direction. But what happens is he's reporting on a different story and he comes across a state database listing all registered teachers, which he needs to fix his story. But it turns out that the social security numbers of all of the teachers are visible in the code underlying this website. And so he abandons the old story and writes a story saying, hey, there's this huge vulnerability in our state database where our social security numbers of our teachers are visible. Okay, seems like a good public service thing, right? Nope. The governor goes after him. I have the quote here. He calls him a beyond unethical hacker, right? Refers this case to the digital forensic unit of the State Highway Patrol, which is also an interesting choice that went that way. And kept holding these press conferences about how scary and how bad this reporter was as a hacker. Now, thankfully, the prosecutors in the state were like, you have no case. We are not going to prosecute this man. So there was no prosecution brought. That didn't stop the governor. He actually ran his reelection campaign in part on anti-hacking journalist bases. Like he ran campaign ads in which he continued to double down on this language of sort of we need to fight the hackers. So that was one case where this has happened. Again, you can see the journalist being framed as a super sophisticated hacker in this instance, being responded to by, oh my gosh, we need to prosecute this man with our most powerful tools. And again, ultimately didn't go down that path, but you could see how that could lead to some of the bad policy consequences. Second one I wanted to talk through, and this one actually was a case I worked on. It was a group of local bloggers in Southern California. They were known as gadflies in their community, so they're sort of known actors. They always put in public records responses all the time. The city was the situation that happened here, and so they're waiting for a batch of public records to come back. And they're like, it's been a while. We should probably check and see if they're back. And so they typed in the URL that they had used for a previous record request. And up popped a Dropbox account that was not password protected. And they went ahead and clicked on the folders and saw all of the documents. And they started their reporting on this basis. City officials, prosecuted. So they prosecuted under the CFAA civilly and threatened criminal violations of the CFAA. In this instance, again, saying that accessing this information by typing in that URL, they were technologically sophisticated hackers and all of that. So again, you can see how the door is being opened to characterizing behavior as criminal through cyber securitization. I can pause for questions on that, or I can go on to other examples and we can circle back. Okay, what do you want to do next?
Antitrust.
Okay, hey, y'all are picking the order that I did. Antitrust argument. So this is really interesting. So far, the situations that I've brought up typically involve a government actor positioning something as a tech threat. This is really interesting because we start to see private sector actors also employing cyber securitization to their own ends. And so there's a couple ways to talk about it. I'm going to use the Apple antitrust case in Europe. So there's laws that are being passed that would require Apple to open up their technology to be more interoperable. That's the sort of background law here. And we actually see Apple invoking cyber securitization and saying, hang on a second, no, your laws are a threat to our users, to the privacy of our users. They don't even go in the security direction. They say it's a threat to the privacy of our users, because opening up this architecture is going to let bad actors, and even not bad actors, but just our competitors who have worse policies than we do, access the information. And so don't do this because you're opening up a can of tech threat worms. And so we're seeing also the private sector get involved in that as well. Starting to poke around a little bit in right to repair cases and seeing if this is being deployed in those as well. It gets a little cloudier there because a lot of the arguments are just this is a threat to the technical security of the system, which falls a little bit outside of the cyber securitization threat to social target thing. So curious if there's any thoughts on how to square that circle. I guess there's only one left. I won't ask you all which one you want to do next. Crime by tech laws. So I talked a little bit about this in the AI context. I also want to just raise that it is occurring in the encryption context. So using encryption to commit a crime, using the internet to commit a crime, using a computer to commit a crime, and my favorite, Louisiana's, using Google Street View to commit a crime. You see this tech threat language invoked in all of those circumstances. And these are really broad laws, Mike knows this, I presented this in his class this morning. These are really broad laws. This is not, you use AI to create a election deepfake. These are, you use this technology to commit any crime. We're going to charge you with a second crime. And so you can see how this logic, again, is opening the door to increased criminalization. Happy to talk about more consequences, but I'll throw it back to you all. Yeah, go ahead.
For the crime by tech law, are those will usually be the federal crimes?
No, these are state level crimes. Yeah, so states are passing laws saying if you use a computer to commit a crime, sometimes even not commit, but facilitate a crime, you're going to be charged
So
with
how do
this.
you decide which state's law they're going to use? Because like if you use internet, you're like everywhere, right?
How do they decide? So the prosecution is going to be brought within a state, and so that state would have to use its own laws to prosecute.
It's like whoever that the offenders domicile at, or like whoever that offenders did that offense, if that makes sense.
Yes, so that gets into internet jurisdiction in the criminal sphere. That's a larger conversation. Happy to talk about that. But most often what we're seeing in the crime by tech laws is someone commits a physical crime in the jurisdiction, like an assault or a robbery. And they happen to use, the internet to, Google their victim or Google the location. That's what this is talking about. This is actually slightly different from computer fraud or anti-hacking laws because it's this kind of crime. It's like very traditional crimes that are being aided by the use of technology.
Yeah.
You can have another example of an antitrust that doesn't involve right to repair.
Well, that one didn't involve right to repair. This is the interoperability stuff in Europe.
Well, it kind of touched on it a bit. I guess I frame it that way.
You
but I-
frame it as
if-
right to repair?
I was wondering if you had another example besides the Apple case.
Those are the two that have come across my table. If you have other examples, I'd be thrilled to hear them.
I guess I always feel torn on the
Yeah.
whole. I mean, I pro right to repair, but at the same time, counterfeit chips are a real thing. We even have people who are professionals in this.
Yeah.
So it's a real threat. So I can see both sides of it.
Absolutely. And I think
That's why I was wondering if you had maybe another example.
that's why the right to repair case is tricky and why it's
Right.
currently not in the paper, because these technical claims of insecurity are so strong. All of the other examples I'm talking about, the claim of threat is like over here about democracy or public safety, right? But the right to repair context, I haven't yet identified a non-technical societal target. So that's why it's currently not in the paper, but I wanted to raise it because I wanted to hear comments like this.
I have a more just general question. Does the definition or the proper definition of cybersecurity really is that really at play here?
No.
I didn't think so, but I wanted to make sure.
Right, yeah, so.
Because there's certainly, a lot of us who work in cyber every day, there are definitional questions, but they tend to be finer grain about what's at the edges. So
Absolutely, yeah.
This is.
Not trying to make a claim about that. I
Yeah.
think that involves another discussion entirely and maybe worth not even defining quite as precisely as we might think we should. This, I'm trying to explore how it's being used in these other conversations that one might not think are cybersecurity issues, but are trying to invoke the technical neutrality, the technical complexity that happens. Yeah.
I really enjoyed this. I have a few thoughts on the right to repair. If you were asking as a way to identify a social harm, I think it's relatively clear to say that it's interference with individual autonomy and property ownership rights by preventing somebody who bought a John Deere tractor from being able to fix it.
Mhm.
So I think it's not too hard to get to the social harm with that example.
But that's not, the technical system isn't threatening people. It's the fact that you can't access the technical system. That's.
But are they
fair.
using the cyber securitization to justify non-right to repair?
Oh, I see. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Let me play with that a bit more.
And then this is much more tangential, but you were saying how crime by tech, the addition of the computer allows them to double down and make
Yeah.
things worse. One of the thoughts that like went through my head was hate speech laws or hate crime laws,
Mm.
right? Where you already have the crime and now they've doubled down by adding that to it. I don't know where that goes, but that's what I thought of. And then the First Amendment stuff I think is interesting because on the one hand, you point out that the First Amendment can be used as a trump card and therefore exacerbate the problem you're trying to solve. On the other hand, that doesn't work out in national security because in TikTok, they just didn't
Right.
care about the First Amendment. They national security, national security, national security. We don't care. So I think,
SEC is the ultimate trump card, I guess.
yeah, so it kind of does work both ways. And sometimes maybe the fact that it is a trump card could be used to bolster why the First Amendment should be more considered in the national security securitization thing.
So to demote the First Amendment considerations as well, essentially. Yeah, is that fair to say?
Well, I think it does multiple things, but to the extent that you have a First Amendment as a trump card, you could use that to start to argue that it should play a greater role in the national security conversation, the cybersecurity conversation. And that helps you
Yeah.
get back to the middle, I think.
Love it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I want to play devil's advocate, and here's
Please.
how. Yeah. We, for the last 25 years, have operated in a space where CEOs of companies did not understand cybersecurity threats enough. Where legislators were too slow to actually legislate against cybersecurity threats. And even when they did it so poorly and without sufficient understanding of the tech involved. So we're up against a universe where we still need to convince people that this is an issue worth spending money and time on. So to the extent that they are former cybersecurity experts who then transition into insurance industries and government agencies and whatever non-cyber activities, and from those spaces, then cybersecuritize conversations that were not typically cybersecurity conversations. They are working to do the work of raising awareness to a problem that still needs raising awareness to. It might result in negative impacts of the kinds that you're highlighting, but are we not still in a space where we need that kind of shakeup?
So I would agree with the double here, actually. There is a real issue about bringing attention and awareness to cybersecurity stuff. We don't have a perfect legal regime or other sorts of regimes to deal with this. I think cybersecurity mission creep is actually a problem for folks trying to do exactly what you're pointing out. And the reason I think it's a problem is because it distracts energy and interest from those issues that really do need attention. And it's like, okay, child social media, now this is our cybersecurity issue. So it does that distracting. It also does a further, I think, disservice to folks who are trying to advocate for better cybersecurity coverage, which is when you're making these claims of this is a cybersecurity issue, this is a tech threat, right? We need all of this stuff, and those claims don't turn out to pan out. I think it delegitimizes making those claims in the space that we actually want to be making. So that's, I think, going back to your question, why this is really important to those doing cybersecurity work proper.
So devil advocate number two.
Uh-oh.
Devil advocate one.
Next level.
You convinced me. Another way of asking my question is this, that there are network realities in the tech bad behavior space. And so you take something like TikTok as an issue, which I would agree with you. TikTok is both a child addiction issue, it's an attention economy issue, but it is also a China espionage issue. And so we have, and I think throughout the presentation, you more than once alluded to the fact that there could be benefits to cyber securitization of problems. And I think a different way of articulating this is to say that a First Amendment issue or a privacy issue or a detention issue have a cybersecurity component to them by the nature of cybersecurity being so omnipresent and relevant. And so maybe the problem isn't the cybersecuritization of the conversation, but that we're not putting guardrails on the cybersecurity elements within that conversation. And so as we think about solutions, it's not necessarily that First Amendment scholars do not need to know cybersecurity, is that they need to know how to employ it in conversations in ways that are narrow and measured.
That's right. And this may not be a direct response to your question, but I want to talk about TikTok a little bit more.
Okay, please.
I've gotten a lot of flack for my characterization of the TikTok case in previous talks. I don't think it is the worst example of cybersecuritization. So I don't think it exhibits all of these second order consequences, which is really interesting because you might disagree with it on other grounds, right? You might think this is a bad thing on other grounds. But if you're doing a purely sort of cybersecuritization critique, the elevation of expertise here, it's hard to make a claim that a ban of the app, right, is pushing this towards expert governance. It's also hard to make a case that a ban is increasing opacity of governance. No, this was like very publicly debated. Nobody gets access to it. I don't sort of see the secretization of governance that you see in other areas with respect to TikTok. So this is sort of a delicate claim to make, but cybersecuritization here actually might be sort of more beneficial than in other areas. That's not to say I'm a fan of the ban, but yeah.
Yeah, I have more like a broader question about what is the relation between cybersecuritization and regulation of cybersecurity?
Mhm.
Because I'm from Poland, and like on the European case, now we have a problem in Europe, in EU, at least in my opinion, that we produced crazy amount of regulation on cybersecurity. We have broad regulation, we have sectoral regulation, we have product specific regulation, we have AI specific regulation, data protection regulation, certification regulation,
Mhm.
tons and tons of cybersecurity specific regulations. And cybersecurity is not improving because of that. Like if we look at like what EU bodies publish on cybersecurity statistics, not getting better. And it probably won't, we will get another edition of all of those regulations because they started to number them. We have NIS 1, NIS 2, probably NIS 3 in the future. So yeah, so that's my question. Is there like a straight line between cybersecurity regulation?
Great question. I don't think there is, and I think this goes back to the question that Asaf asked, right? There's real things that we need to be bringing attention to, and cybersecuritization, I think, distracts from those conversations. The new thing I want to add in response to your question is actually to talk about how cybersecuritization of these sort of societal issues can relate back to regulation of cybersecurity issues. So this is like the craziest story that I came across in my research. Utah has let me go back to this slide. Utah has a crime by tech law that says if you commit a crime and you use encryption in the course of committing that crime, you're charged with 2 crimes. Okay, so that's the background here. What Utah did is they turned around and tried to use their crime by tech law to sue Facebook in civil court for facilitating child sexual abuse materials. And so they're sort of trying to regulate a private actor through the use of their crime by tech law. This to me just seems like a wacky way to go about this, right? It seems like there's a much more direct way that you could address this issue and perhaps pass cybersecurity regulations about this issue instead of going through the back door crime by tech law. That didn't go anywhere, thankfully, but the complaint is worth a read. It's just crazy.
Like if you want to look at a very interesting example of something similar, but more on like a public administration, I will send it to you because it's very
Yes.
hard to find because it's a project now. It's a Polish project of transposing NIS2 in Poland, but we've added a very interesting mechanism in there, which allows Ministry of Digitalization to basically exclude a company from the market, from providing services or products or whatever to the market. And the reasoning behind that is usually it will be secret, like what's the reasoning behind that, but the overall reason is being outside of EU or NATO and national security reasons. So that is exactly that. So I think that that's like for your research, like an extreme case of doing something like that. I think that's in like a democratic country.
You can see I'm
At least.
excited because
Yeah.
I'm going to plug another paper. I'm writing about internet fragmentation and the kind of use of this
Yeah.
move as being positioned within the framework of internet fragmentation. So I'd love to see that.
Great.
I have like, I think 2 questions, comments, and I'm trained in political science/international relations, so I'm not a lawyer.
Okay, I am too. So we can talk.
Okay, okay. So it seemed to me like the problem was motivated by the like national level issue, right? Disinformation or misinformation, which is a real national security issue. But most of the cases are state issues, so they're internal. So I was wondering, what is the connection between the two? And then secondly, if we think about like the early days of cybersecurity, cyberspace manifesto, right? The states didn't still have like this authority in this new domain, in the new environment. So the way that early hackers were prosecuted for their crimes were really severe, destroyed their entire livelihoods, right? So I was wondering whether there are historical references in the not knowing what really the technological issue is. So then the state, the government is overreacting in order to ensure dominance in the space, whether we're seeing some of that now, legacies of that in the cases that you're describing.
Great questions. Yeah, I think the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act is actually one of the earliest examples of cybersecuritization. We can circle back to that. On the federal level versus the state level, really glad you brought up that point, because one of the things I'm trying to do with this project is show that cybersecuritization happens at all levels. So national securitization is not something that's happening at the state level, typically, right? That's a federal government issue. But cybersecuritization is something that's happening at all levels of government and across both the civil and criminal lines. So it's almost much more pervasive than the national securitization.
That's actually great. It is visible on this slide already, but what you said now, like it is an issue at like international, like public international level, private international level, like local, like criminal law, tort liability, everything.
Yeah.
And on like a very low level regulation of operations of some like governmental body in the middle of nowhere. Like it's an issue everywhere, basically.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
legal perspective.
It's also very evident at very low levels of government. I was just talking to a person on the Public Safety Committee in a municipality in California who is trying to put forward regulations about how long data is retained from automatic license plate readers. And the answer they keep getting from the lawyers is we can't do that because of cybersecurity. And they're like, what is this claim, right? And so even at the very, very lowest level of government, you're starting to see an invocation of this to prevent regulation. Yeah. And then your other question was about Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. This is my opinion. This is sort of outside of the realm of the claims I'm trying to make in the paper. But I think what we're seeing with the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act is in the olden days, as you point out, there really was this reaction to overblown fears of technology. Like, we don't understand this. We have to be super harsh. I think that's being turned around now. And political actors are using that overblown fear to different ends. They understand that it's not real, whereas maybe they didn't before, but now they're using that fear in utilitarian ways.
Hello, first of all, very interesting presentation. I enjoyed it a lot. And I have a question, but it's a non-legal question.
Okay, shoot.
So for some time, I have been looking into the speeches of the policymakers when it comes to cybersecurity. And while looking at specific policies, not the whole cybersecurity policies, and using theories and running software, I had a hypothesis like yours, like the audience is a non-technical and a societal target. I think it's the words they use. But to my surprise, after running the analysis and analyzing what these policymakers were saying, what it came up is that the audience is actually the owners of the infrastructure behind all this. In a few words, the private sector, right? Why? Because they are the owners, the operators of the critical infrastructure, of the internet infrastructure, because the government wants them to become the operators of the infrastructure, cyber and critical, and because they can reach the networks the government cannot in the US and abroad. So I wonder, so my hypothesis got discarded.
Okay.
So I wonder if you can develop a little bit more. Why do you mean by this non-technical societal target?
Yes, sure. First, I would love to see the research if you were willing to share that with me. This point about rhetoric is really interesting. Can I ask also, what kinds of arguments are you seeing government actors make to the private infrastructure owners?
Well, this was specifically analyzing the internet blackouts.
Okay.
So it's limited to this specific policy, but the argument that kept coming for that specific policy is, we need to protect the critical infrastructure. And I thought in my mind when I was studying the study, that this will be relevant for the people, right? Because at the end of the people are beneficiaries of the management of the critical infrastructure. But after analyzing the speeches, I realized not that they are not irrelevant, but not the primary.
Okay, this is going to feel like a bit of a dodge, but I'm going to pause it without knowing everything that you've looked at, that actually might be outside the scope of what I'm looking at.
It is. I have started running the analysis again.
Yep.
Mr. Trump talked a little bit about this.
Yep. He's given us lots of good rhetoric.
not in this Not in the second parent, but in the first parent.
But the reason I bring that up is because cyber securitization, as sort of I'm trying to scope it, is largely a public facing conversation. And so what you're describing is a conversation between the government and private sector actors that's not sort of meant for public consumption compared to legislatures talking about child social media, right? That's sort of very public directed. And so I think that would be a difference and maybe something I should highlight more in the paper that when I'm talking about invoking threats to societal targets, it's meant to be directed towards a public audience.
With the license plate reader example that you gave, I didn't quite understand it. Are you saying that they were
I don't need
saying-
to be frank,
Okay.
but I'll do my best.
Well, no, I'm trying to understand. So they cyber securitized it because they couldn't release information about how long they keep license plates numbers?
So figuring out what they're actually trying to say when they say this is a cybersecurity issue has been a headache. As best as I can tell, what they're arguing is that data retention policies, in order to make retaining this video secure, would be cost prohibitive. And so therefore they can't. The background is they're actually not using these cameras right now. They're just security theater. And so this Public Safety Commission is like, we've spent all this money on them. We should be
Sure,
using
I got a warning.
in Indianapolis, not in this particular municipality. In this particular,
My car.
but in this particular municipality, California law, they're interpreting sort of data retention stuff in cybersecurity about retained data to mean that they can't actually record using the cameras, which this Public Safety Commission thinks is bunk.
Okay, so I mean, I get what you're saying with all this, but there often are times when we can't reveal like certain, rules that we have internally or something, because if we do, then they can be exploited in some way. So we have to often just be kind of conservative with what we release or something like that. It's like when you run a business, like my wife and I ran a business for a while. And there were several things that we couldn't tell to the public or tell to our customers just because it would create complexities or whatever. And it's like, boy, I really wish I could tell them this, but I can't or something because it would reveal something else.
Yeah, and I think, again, sometimes there's good reasons for opacity of governance, but framing issues as cybersecurity moves it into the realm where that's an acceptable, right? We can't tell you this other stuff, so we definitely can't tell you this stuff. That's sort of how the.
I know people do abuse it.
Yeah.
Per se.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's hard, hard to distinguish when is this a real technical claim?
Another point that's interesting is that for the past 10 or 15 years, we've been trying to tell everybody like cybersecurity is everywhere. And you're telling us cybersecurity isn't everywhere.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're talking about like it's in your, your DVD player and in your thermostat and stuff like that. And it's in your water treatment facility.
That may be true, but it is not in your kids' social lives. I don't know. That's tough.
So, one thing we didn't talk about a lot is like, who are the actors who are doing cybersecuritization and what is incentivizing cybersecuritization? And the slide that talked about simplification of the deliberative process had narrowed down to a particular set of reasons to cybersecuritize, but I don't think it's the only reason that people might engage in that kind of discourse. And so, for example, one thing that we might want to incentivize is cautious lawyering. So a lawyer who is just really nervous might call everything cybersecurity as a way of just not risk aversing.
Like these local.
Like potentially these local lawyers. And maybe that's a good thing, even if, again, the outcome, societal outcomes are bad. And so on the other hand, where there is an actor who is just using this as a trump card, there's a more malicious motivation there to just circumvent the need for actual complex. Like, I wonder if there's certain things that we'll be willing to say that's okay or we understandable versus things that should not be okay.
Yes. So I should make one clarification, which is I'm not positing that simplification is the reason that individuals engage in this process.
It's just an outcome.
My claim is this is always something that accompanies it. So it's not a motivation. It is sort of what happens. Sometimes it can be a motivation, right? There are good reasons that you might want to simplify a debate. But I'm not making a claim about sort of the good and the bad reasons. It's a tricky thing to answer, which ones are good and which ones are bad. The way that I've tried to do it so far is, again, point out these other second order consequences. And sort of when you end up having all of these consequences stacked, more likely than not, the governance outcome is going to be a little bit problematic, but not always.
But why am I saying all this? Because I think you're highlighting a very important,
Mhm.
clear point.
Yeah.
Concern. And then the question is, so how, going back to your original slide, you want to teach this, right? So like, what is the right way to talk? What is the right thing to do in these circumstances? And it's not always clear to me that the answer is just, don't call it cybersecurity ever. So it's kind of more nuanced answer, and I'm trying to kind of drill
Yeah.
down what that answer.
My sort of fourth part of the law review article for the students about solutions would be, okay, fine, maybe you can do simplification, but stay away from the rest of these things. Do them very thoughtfully and be aware that they're flowing from the initial simplification of that. So I think, if I were teaching this, I would say, be aware of the simplification and watch for those second order consequences, and be wary of.
Do you want?
Yeah, I would love to get to one of the questions from online.
Great.
So it says, you argue that cyber securitization thrives on opacity and specialist deference. With the efforts to reauthorize CISA authorities, what enforceable mechanisms would you add to flip incentives away from threat logic?
What incentives would I offer to flip?
What enforceable mechanisms would you add to flip incentives away from?
Yeah, so this is tricky. I'm not sure that there is a legal solution to cyber securitization. I think it shows up in legal debates. I'm not taking your question,
I am just reading the question.
looking at me funny. I think
Just as normal.
that's just,
It's not.
in legal conversations, but I'm not sure that there is a legal solution to this. I think it's something that we should be aware of in the process of making laws. And also looking at sort of under the hood, what legislatures are talking about and the bases they're offering for making laws. I don't know that we can come up with something that's enforceable to say, don't use tech threat logic, other than make rules against opaque governance. But as you pointed out, that can get tricky for good reasons, right?
Yeah, just a two finger
Yeah.
on that, because it ties directly to the question that I asked about who's the actor who's doing the work. Are we more okay or less okay with cybersecurity actors who are expanding their reaches into non-cybersecurity spaces versus non-cybersecurity spaces who are expanding their reaches into I think that CISA saying that we now should play a role in democracy, as your first slide demonstrated, is in that first category, and then maybe that's worse or bad. I don't know, bad,
Yeah.
but
I started out writing the paper exactly along those lines. Turns out that's very hard to make a judgment about, because defining who's a cybersecurity actor gets back to your question about defining
cybersecurity.
what is the proper expansion of the technical concept of cybersecurity. So I've stayed away from that. I think if I were to offer a response to that, it would be government actors invoking this typically ends up worse than private actors invoking this, just because of the scope of what they're able to do in terms of consequences. But we can debate that point. Yes.
And it is inspired about one thing that Asaf said about lawyers panicking
Yes.
about stuff. I wonder, because all of those examples are of people who are more or less informed about cybersecurity and trying to make an argument. What about the case of like 100% fully malicious conduct, things like false flagging, the cybersecurity issues or cybersecurity risks, to push an agenda on like a local state level, in that, because that's like an for me like an ultimate case of this cybersecuritization, like a cyber scare kind of scenario.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm worried about. I think that's sort of the worst case scenario with respect to cyber securitization. Personally, I think that's happening in the criminal space, especially with these things like, oh, you Google the address and now you've used Street View to commit your like that. That seems like maybe a false flag type of situation. I don't think every instance of cyber securitization is, though, as we've talked about. Also, I just want to point out, I've given you all as lawyers, cybersecurity, a second reason to panic. Now you don't have to just worry about if you're not including things enough. You have to worry about, oh no, is this a zone of cyber securitization that I should exclude? Patricia, do you have another hand?
Yes, so in the academic literature of the international relations, when you talk about national security in general, you talk about, well, you have the policymaker who's doing the policy, you have the audience, and you have the speech, right? But the main purpose of the speech is, in this case, is the national security policy you are talking about, and is the defense of the national interest, right? You create this policy because there is something you want to protect. That's the end of the cybersecurity. And in all the examples you have pointed out, I'm sorry, I'm not very knowledgeable, but I see a lot of talking, a lot of mess, but I don't identify that thing that's the national interest to frame all these cybersecurity.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think cybersecuritization is actually sometimes used to hide the ball on what exactly it is as a national security matter that we're trying to protect. So if you really press people on the TikTok case, what the national security threat is, sometimes people struggle to answer that question. There's some who can give a good answer, but not everyone who's sort of been invoking this as a national security issue can answer that question. And I think that's where cybersecuritization comes in, is it's sort of easy to say, it's a tech threat issue, like don't ask questions. But you're right, it can be used to obscure that. I saw you nodding. Add anything?
I want to, can I ask a question? I feel bad. I came late, which is incredibly rude, and I apologize. And then I feel even worse because then I'm going to ask a question which you covered or you may have already ruled out of bounds.
Okay, this gave me my first job at CACR, so you get a pass.
One of the things that maybe this is a parallel topic, I'm not in any way trying to say it is your topic, but one of the things that at least influences your topic is that there's a natural tendency to sort of go where the money and the spotlight is. So post 9/11, everyone became a terrorist. It didn't matter what you were doing. If you stole paper clips from the law school, you were a terrorist. And, privacy was big for a while. Everything was a privacy issue. And, I can remember once suggesting to the head of the TSA that if they were looking for accountability about TSA agents who opened bags, they could just have somebody put in a piece of paper with their badge number. And he's like, oh, no, we couldn't do that for privacy reasons. And I'm like, you're searching my underwear and you're worried about the privacy of your agent. And I'm like, you're just making this shit up. And, that's okay. We all do this sometimes. Even if we're not professional politicians. And, then we've seen this about AI, everything's AI now. So anything I don't like, I call it AI, and then I've got an instant audience for it and I can get the press to write about it and so forth. So cybersecurity seems to really present this too. And I actually wrote an editorial for a publication years ago about the challenge it presented for privacy people, because cybersecurity was where all the money was. And so if you said, no, I do privacy, I don't do cybersecurity, you were cutting yourself off from 99% of the budget. But if you said, I do cybersecurity, then you ran the risk of undermining your privacy mission. It all became cybersecurity. So I guess I'm trying to figure out to what extent what you were talking about feels different or worse or distinct, and again, if you want to just tell me to come on time next time, I'll.
I don't remember which slide I want to show in response to that. I think absolutely. Oh, the simplification slide. I think this is one of the reasons. Remember, I was saying this to Asaf, the simplification is not a reason. I think you can use the simplification to get access to resources. So that is a reason I think folks might engage in cybersecuritization, certainly. However, I want to offer two sort of counter examples to this. I think there's also a political neutrality benefit to characterizing something as a cybersecurity issue. So I can't put this on my paper because it's not a public source. But I've heard that trust and safety divisions of internet platforms are being moved into the cybersecurity division. Right, that's not a resource question. That is we want to put this behind sort of the political neutrality of the technical work that cybersecurity folks do. So I think there's that as well. And then the other thing I want to offer, and maybe this is like a really bummer note to end on, but I teach cybersecurity law. Every year there's a question of, do I keep teaching cybersecurity law? I'm getting pushback that this is now a passé subject. This is not where the resources are. It's AI, right? And so maybe that ship has maybe sailed, but yet, especially local actors are still using this, especially in the criminal space. That's also not a question of resources about cybersecurity. So I'll end on that bummer note.
Well,
Scott, did you have a question? I'm
No,
sorry.
it's okay. We're out of time. I'll come up after.
Okay.
It's great. It's great. Yeah.
I do think we're out of time. Join me in thanking Mailyn. Real quick, so folks know the next talk in the speaker series is on November 13th. It is Jim Dempsey, who many of you know or have heard of, and the topic is, what is the Trump 2.0 approach to cybersecurity? Hope to see you for that. I think it's in the same room.
You can ask him if they're using cyber securitization.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Jim is gonna be here virtually, just so you guys know, but we'll still gather, do food and
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's all we can say.
I'm so sorry to also be so rude and come late.
You're a year ago for my friends, but that was the first time.
I'm glad you said the doors. Why I was thinking you put it in and so there's a that you're doing. Has that been good? Remember how
It's in this room? Okay, okay.
Right?
Jim, I see.
Okay, that's great. Is he still engaged with this?
He's retired.
He fully retired and he's
Right.
happy and is he really? Good for him. That sounds nice.
Different kind of writing than.
I was thinking,
We so appreciate you coming.
Thank you for-
It was terrific. Great discussion. What am I
Oh,
not?
no, I welcome back to Bloomington, Marshall Leaf. I was excited to.
Let's see,
Because I had-
this guy to commit to doing.
Good to see you.
And even,
We'll do it. So we'll do a commemoration. We're gonna do.
but you're, but what?
Do a whole thing.
That did a lot of different things. It is in Chicago. Full musician.
Most of my, the fog of scholarship. Well,
Yes.
She's still an active musician gigging, and she also is like the organizer of a house for asylum seekers who are else.
We talked.
Oh, geez. Well, anyway, the reason why
He went
Sarah
HR and
was her contemporary and,
so their research innovator.
and.
Oh, is it?
So the last thing I've heard is that we don't even know.
Okay.
Sarah,
lost your idea.
Maybe sometimes, I don't know.
thank you for coming.
Little I had.
I'll be here.
You see Chicago.
Oh, no.
Oh,
Good. I do it again.
Supposedly.
Outside of a screen. How's the tour going?
I was thinking it.
Esther's okay?
I'm out of here.
Process of figure.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, and then you.
All of that stuff is.
I would love that. I'm not in.
Like his question now.
You are, so thank you. I don't have a card, but I will. I will.
I'm glad somebody.
Very cool. Very cool.
Well, it's just.
Absolutely.
I do. It's a budget
Oh, dude.
card.
So-
I can see my-
Oh, no, you're okay. If I can help corral students to join you or otherwise, let me know. But yeah, that's what you need. So an internship program, right? Let's get.
Taking my PhD actually in Poland on tort liability for cyber attacks. I think it's a great.
I hear you.
So it's honestly the.
Here, and I'm just double checking the original.
Yeah.
Cybersecurity.
CACR or whatever my job is. Like,
So cool. I think it could, we just give it a think about like.
this, so,
Project might be, you know what I mean? Cause if it's a
Yeah.
little bit more,
I mean, I do,
I don't know,
do think,
cutting edge stuff, or if we're involving like a variety of different
I
disciplines.
do think
We could do capstone, but if it's something like, hey, we just
center.
X, right?
Center.
More cut and dry.
Reality in
We're
the
also-
city, honestly, but
Is of data governance.
uncertainty is starting to get in the way of.
Yeah.
Now.
Oh, absolutely.
Exactly.
What our financial kind of picture looks like. I mean,
I'm starting, I'll make a mental note. I'll make a mental note and,
With an email or something.
Go do that.
Better
Me
idea.
too.
Oh,
You know, we can, one way or the other, we can plan
yeah,
on
so.
spring. I'm sure the students would love it.
So,
With you on that.
so
Thanks for being willing.
it's three, I have.
I already got rid of that.
Do you?
We're doing centrally.
So many travel.
Very good reason.
Yeah.
2 days off. So
How was dessert?
Yeah.
Very.
thinking
good.
about.
Yes, I can give you.
Take a picture.
Try to make it.
Oh.
Precisely.
That is so.
Bob Loudon's against it.
Yeah.
stay put where we are.
But you
holds that against us or something
Right.
like that.
The world.
So when he left and there's a lot of, Jack got his
Like mental
Hypothesis
happened
very.
throughout the day. Like right before this, I was with all the.
Very interesting work that you're doing,
I led the.
but I would love to see it too.
Yeah, I will
Research is stored in ICR.
finish my book.
Okay.
But no, we can.
Mike.
Thank you.
The
for jumping
30
on that.
Needed to build some
Appreciate it. Yeah. Yeah.
First I was like, you know, I'm not a.
Absolutely.
a judge. I
Oh,
wouldn't
you
think.
was some.
No, I know.
Over.
Honestly, you know, I appreciate.
We'll need some help.
Yeah, it's-
Supporting.
I wanted to get more. Then
We could do, we have this capability that would really serve in strategic.
And would you do that all the, you know, as you know, all too well.
That,
Anyway, thank you.
it'll
be great.
Yeah.
I was.
Something like. I'm here.
Graduate.
Yes, yeah.
It's kind of like.
If you.
And on that book chapter.
Uh-huh.
Cool, sort of rejected the whole
Congratulations.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
I saw that actually separately.
And it just became clear to me very quickly, like, well, this is
I
not.
can give you the.
Right. I
Was
can-
that like a spot? Stop, Michael.
It's easy to,
Okay, so anyway,
easy to,
I.
well, maybe that was part of,
Yeah, I did.
but
I served on like this D and.
So I'll be honest, it take me a second.
But it's like,
No,
everybody's. Thing like,
like, oh, I'm not stressed.
The Erasmus grant.
No, it's been.
That came, oh, we should do.
I mean, my
So that
perspective
means you'll be around.
is that
I'm
the distance,
Context for.
because I have a very good relationship,
I mean, usually
with people who
6 months.
but in part through those relationships.
In touch, if there's anything I can.
And it wouldn't work if it was.
Block, you know,
Yeah, I know.
You're okay with us.
Shack that we had
Data.
adequately set the stage.
Maybe we could.
That
But it sounds-
even if he didn't,
Yeah, 'cause-
that it would be a discussion, that it would be like an adult conversation about how to make this work.
Maybe.
And
Maybe.
This is the first time I've
my
seen.
sense of, there just seems to be such a distance.
Yeah.
between him
I was.
I think it's really.
And the people who report
I
to him.
think that.
And, you know,
So I'll tell you.
I don't know how many times I said, I would be happy. There's some complexities here that are.
Look, it's, if you just.
It's
right.
Just an admission
And I was,
briefing.
you know,
It's so interesting.
and,
Once it's
and
quick,
I,
oh, that's.
The Indian.
Did see it every.
Scott Michaels, the last time I said that without like
But if
standing
you find it, let me
in
know.
front of him, he was like, I'll let you know what he thinks.
Him, the
And then he
introduction,
let
I haven't-
Shaq know what he said and Shaq let, so I'm just like,
So I.
it's certainly not gonna work.
Until.
I don't think I
I'd be
can.
curious. whether
Because-
it's-
Have a structure where I don't get to talk to the. making decisions.
So the original data that.
It would help just situate them. What are we talking about? What are the? kind of-
Not only are all the things in play that you are well aware
That's
of,
why I think.
I think there are also just like other
2
things.
weeks.
that-
Works.
How long is it gonna be here?
Back on what I said.
I don't know, it's never been anywhere more than a year.
Yeah.
And this would be the end of this. So.
Oh, yeah.
They will.
Be looking.
My youngest-
What's happening.
But, no.
He still lives in a world where he thinks everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think.
I think most of us who have been here
I
for a
hope.
while know that that's not how centers work. You've got to be able to cover some things to make them
Well,
work.
Of course, but don't feel any pressure if it looks in.
One of our points on this,
Let me know if you.
every dollar
Especially.
been
Right.
given to CACR
Item.
by the university, brought in civilization,
Right.
right? And so
So
So.
that's not what I mean by, I mean like making, not in the accounting sense, but
It
Again,
is what
picking
like-
spatial masterminds, we'll be taking. this stuff.
we give.
It's like,
the
I've got it,
dollar
it's just
salary,
Yeah,
you
privacy.
share rate,
Then it was cyber.
Yeah, there, your salary.
times, yeah.
And that's not the books of a hierarchy.
So I'm gonna run to the restroom.
And then there's still the whole question of why, you know, there were good historical reasons why CACR
Yeah.
is separate from like informatics and computer science and, you know, all the sort of academic pieces. I think a lot of those are gone now. And so.
Hey, Asaf, could you close Zoom?
Hello.
I can. I was about to copy paste these two other comments for her.
Okay.
Aside from that.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize we.
Do you have time?